I entered the regenerative agriculture community with curiosity, but I quickly realized curiosity alone could not prepare me for the depth of transformation waiting for me. The community wasn't a farm in the traditional sense. It was a living ecosystem, a place where soil, plants, animals, humans, and even the smallest microorganisms were treated as members of the same family. The moment I arrived, the first thing that struck me was the silence. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind filled with subtle sounds of life, buzzing insects, rustling leaves, gentle footsteps on soft ground. It was a silence that demanded attention. My first morning began before sunrise. A soft orange glow pushed away the darkness as the community slowly woke up. People here didn't rush. They moved with a calm rhythm, as if breathing with the land. Breakfast was simple, warm porridge made with grains grown a few meters from where we ate. Even the act of eating felt different. Food wasn't just fuel. It was a reminder of interdependence and responsibility. As I spent more time observing, I began to understand that the community followed principles radically different from conventional farming. Instead of imposing control, they practiced collaboration. Instead of asking, "How do we produce more?" they asked, "How do we heal the soil so it can give life for generations?" That shift in mindset was the first turning point for me. During soil building sessions, I learned how rich, dark, healthy soil was created not by machines, but by countless relationships. Compost, worms, fallen leaves, animal manure, microorganisms, each played a role. When I held a handful of living soil for the first time, I realized I had spent most of my life stepping on it without ever appreciating its complexity. Here, soil wasn't dirt. It was a foundation for everything: nutrition, climate resilience, and even community values. The people in the community each had their own story. Some came from cities burned out by corporate careers. Some had grown up on farms devastated by chemical-intensive practices. Others were young students searching for a purpose beyond screens and digital noise. Despite their different backgrounds, everyone shared a desire to repair what was broken, both in nature and within themselves. Daily work was structured but never rigid. Some mornings we planted cover crops like clover and rye to protect the soil. Other times we observed water flow patterns, learning how to slow down runoff and restore natural hydration. On certain afternoons, we mulched fruit trees or moved grazing animals to fresh pasture so grasslands could regenerate. I watched how rotational grazing mimicked the movement of wild herds, helping the land recover instead of degrading it. The deeper I immersed myself, the more I understood that regenerative agriculture wasn't a technique. It was a philosophy. It invited humility. It asked humans to step back, listen, and participate rather than dominate. It taught me that nature doesn't rush, yet everything gets done. And slowly I began to adopt the same patience. By the end of my first week, something unexpected began to shift inside me. I wasn't just learning how to farm. I was learning how to observe, how to slow down, and how to reconnect with the rhythms I had forgotten in my modern life. The land was teaching me, quietly but powerfully, and I realized I had only scratched the surface of what this journey would become. The second phase of my immersion revealed what textbooks never could. Regeneration is not only environmental, it is deeply personal. As I spent more days with the community, I witnessed the subtle but profound ways people changed through their relationship with the land. Arguments softened, anxiety faded. People who once avoided responsibility began taking initiative, moved by a desire to contribute, not by obligation. It was as if the slow, patient pace of ecological cycles was reshaping our inner cycles as well. Weekly gatherings became the heart of our communal life. We sat in a circle under a large acacia tree, sharing challenges, breakthroughs, and sometimes simply gratitude. One farmer spoke about the first year he stopped using chemical fertilizers and how terrifying it was to trust natural processes again. A young volunteer talked about healing her burnout through manual labor and sunrise routines. Stories overlapped, forming a collective testimony that regeneration works not only on land, but on people. My tasks gradually grew more complex. I learned to design polyculture beds, mixing herbs, vegetables, and flowers so they naturally supported each other. I helped install a gray water system that recycled sink water to nourish fruit shrubs. I observed how chickens aerated soil while searching for insects, doing work that no machine could replicate with such elegance. Every system mirrored nature's intelligence, reminding me that humans thrive when they imitate, not overpower, ecological wisdom. But the most transformative moment came unexpectedly. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I walked through a field newly restored after years of being barren. The soil that had once been pale and lifeless was now dark and moist. Grasses swayed gently in the wind, and insects buzzed around wildflowers that had reappeared on their own. In that quiet moment, I felt something I had never felt so clearly before: hope. Not optimism based on wishes, but hope rooted in evidence. Nature recovers when we give it space, care, and time. Living within this community taught me that regeneration is slow, often invisible, and sometimes frustrating. But it is also steady, collaborative, and deeply rewarding. It challenges our culture of instant results and invites us into a long-term relationship with the planet. It shows us that sustainability is not the end goal. Regeneration is. Sustainability maintains. Regeneration restores. As my immersion approached its end, I noticed I had become part of a rhythm far older than myself. I woke with the sun without feeling forced. I recognized bird calls. I understood the meaning of soil moisture, the direction of wind, and the subtle language of plants. These were not skills I expected to gain, yet they became lessons I carried with me long after leaving. When I finally said goodbye to the community, I felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. But more importantly, I felt responsibility, the kind that comes from understanding that every choice we make affects the ground beneath us. Regenerative agriculture had given me more than knowledge. It had given me a new way of seeing, living, and belonging. This immersion did not end when I left the farm. In many ways, it only began. The real journey continues each day as I apply what I learned, choosing connection over convenience, restoration over exploitation, patience over speed, and hope over resignation. The land taught me, and I am still listening. As weeks turned into months, I found myself slowly dissolving into the rhythm of the Regenerative Agriculture Community. At first, I treated each task as something to complete: weeding, mulching, planting, compost turning. But eventually, every action shifted from doing work to participating in life. The community often said that farming here was not a profession, it was a practice, a daily meditation rooted in the soil. One of the most meaningful rituals was the weekly listening walk. A group of us would move silently through the fields at dawn, with no tools, no cameras, no intentions, simply listening. I had never realized how many conversations were happening around me. The tapping of woodpeckers, the hum of pollinators moving from flower to flower, the subtle changing of wind direction announcing a shift in weather. These sounds held information that farmers and industrial systems often ignore, relying instead on screens, sensors, and algorithms. Here, the land itself was the technology. Another ritual was the evening meal. After hours of work under the sun, we gathered at a long wooden table illuminated by soft lanterns. Fresh greens still warm from the field, eggs collected that morning, herbs picked minutes before cooking, everything tasted alive. What struck me most was the gratitude that flowed naturally in these meals. We thanked the soil, the plants, the animals, the weather, and even each other. Gratitude wasn't a performance. It was a shared understanding that nothing we consumed came without relationship. Beyond rituals, I began to notice the ecological intelligence built into every design choice. Water catchment ponds shaped like teardrops slowed rainfall. Terraces softened steep hillsides. Swales guided water gently across fields, preventing erosion. Cover crops protected the soil, while companion plants reduced pests naturally. Everything worked together like a well-composed orchestra, with each element complementing, supporting, or balancing another. One day I shadowed a community member named Amara, a former architect who had redesigned her entire approach to planning after discovering regenerative principles. She explained that in nature, edges, the places where ecosystems meet, were the most productive and biodiverse spaces. Our goal, she said, is not to build straight lines, but to create meaningful edges. I had never thought about the world in such terms, yet it suddenly made sense. Creativity wasn't an invention, it was an observation. Living in the community also reshaped my sense of time. Modern life had conditioned me to measure productivity in speed and output, but regenerative work followed seasons, not schedules. Seeds sprouted when they were ready. Compost matured at its own pace. Pastures regenerated only after animals moved on. Nothing could be rushed. And strangely, as I surrendered to this slower rhythm, I felt a kind of peace I had never known. The anxiety I once carried, the pressure to achieve, perform, and accelerate, began to loosen its grip. Regeneration, I realized, was not just about healing land. It was about relearning patience, presence, and humility. The earth had its own clock, and the community lived by it. That shift in perception became one of the greatest gifts of my immersion. When the day finally came for me to leave, I expected only sadness, the kind that comes from saying goodbye to a place that had held you gently and reshaped you quietly. But the emotion that surprised me most was a sense of responsibility. The land had given me more than knowledge, it had given me a calling. On my last morning, I walked alone through the fields that had become familiar as the lines in my own palms. Dew glistened on young leaves. Earthworms tunneled just beneath the surface. Birds announced the new day with layered melodies. Everything felt alive, interconnected, purposeful. I paused beside the compost pile, the place where life and decay danced together, and felt a deep truth settle inside me. Nothing in nature is wasted. Every cycle leads to another. Every ending contains a beginning. The community gathered to offer me a farewell circle. Instead of speeches, they shared observations, reflections of how I had grown, the ways I had contributed, and the insights I had brought into conversations. It was humbling to hear how they viewed my transformation, because I had not noticed it happening. Regeneration, like soil formation, happens slowly and silently. Before I left, the elder of the community, a gentle man named Rafi, handed me a small cloth pouch. Inside were a handful of seeds, some native beans, a few wildflowers, and a rare medicinal plant they had carefully cultivated. "These are not gifts," he said with a smile. "They are responsibilities. Plant them with intention wherever your journey takes you." Carrying those seeds felt symbolic. They represented everything I had learned: reciprocity, stewardship, patience, and the belief that healing is possible, not just for ecosystems, but for societies and even for individuals. I realized that the world outside the community desperately needed these principles. Cities needed green spaces that nourished both soil and spirit. Farmers needed alternatives to destructive practices. People needed reminders that life is not a competition, but a collaboration. As I returned to my former life, I felt the contrast sharply. The noise, the speed, the pressure, the obsession with efficiency. All the things I once accepted now felt misaligned with the deeper truths I had learned. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt guided. Regenerative living had taught me resilience, to make change not through force, but through steady, intentional action. I began transforming small parts of my daily life. I planted compost in my backyard. I grew herbs in reused containers. I learned to cook with food that honored the season. I reduced waste, walked more, and paid attention to the unnoticed patterns of weather, insects, and plants. These actions seemed small, but they helped me maintain a connection to the land's wisdom. More importantly, I started sharing my experience through storytelling, workshops, conversations, and eventually community projects. I realized that regeneration spreads like seeds carried by the wind. One story can change a mindset. One garden can inspire a neighborhood. One healed person can influence a family. And one committed community can transform an entire region. The true lesson of my immersion is simple. Regeneration begins with attention. When we pay attention to the land, we learn how to care for it. When we pay attention to each other, we learn how to build community. And when we pay attention to ourselves, we learn how to heal. I left the regenerative agriculture community physically, but I carry it everywhere. In the soil I nurture, the choices I make, and the stories I tell. The land is no longer just a place beneath my feet. It is a teacher, a partner, and a reminder that the future can still be restored, one seed at a time.